Hello, Safe Harbor. We come again here in a 12-minute mark to the crucifixion. This is the climax here of the entire gospel in chapter 15. We just saw that Pilate, wanting to please the crowd or the mob, hands Jesus over to be flogged and crucified. Now, as we look at Mark's version of the crucifixion, we can really sum it up with one word. I'd love for you to think for a moment and say, when I hear the word crucify, what would be a synonym for that, or what would be the one word description of that? You can put that in comments or text me and let me know. Yeah, when I think of crucifixion, this is the image I have, or this is the word that comes up. Because as we look at Mark's crucifixion, it may surprise you how he frames the crucifixion in terms of what he really emphasizes. And so we'll look for that as we go through here, starting with chapter 15, verse 16. And the soldiers led Jesus then away to the palace, that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him and twisted together a crown of thorns and put on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again, they struck him and spit at him, and they bowed down and pretended to worship him, and they mocked him. And then they took the robe off of him and put his own clothes back on. A certain man from Cyrene named Alexander, or named Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was on his way from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, that is the place of the skull. They offered him wine, myrrh, but he didn't take it. And then they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lot to see which each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 thieves with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, saying, "So, you who are going to tear the temple down and destroy it in 3 days and then rebuild it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross so we may see and believe. Those crucified with him also hurled insults at him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until the afternoon. And it was 3 p.m. when Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" All right, we'll stop there, even though we're right in the middle of it. What was that word? When you think of the crucifixion, what image pops up? You might think horror or pain, murder, just excruciating, or agony. All types of things might be appropriate, but for Mark, he highlights really one thing. And we see not only what's highlight, but what's omitting. What don't we have in Mark's view of the crucifixion? There's no spear into the side. There's no nails. There's no blood. There's no real pain. It sounds silly to say this is a pain-free crucifixion, but it's the horror and the gore is really not highlighted at all in Mark the way it is in the other Gospels. And we would expect to see it from Mark, because so far Mark's Gospel has been by far the most vivid and graphic whenever it describes miracles, exorcisms. It always gives us all the adjectives, like you're right there and you're seeing it. But when it comes to the crucifixion, it's a very, we might say, a very PG rated type of crucifixion image that we get. And there's a couple reasons I think Mark does this. One is he didn't need to describe in great detail crucifixion to his readers. The crucifixions were unfortunately a dime a dozen among the Romans, and so they didn't need all the graphic display there. But really, it's understanding the crucifixion in terms of the one word that we see that Jesus uses himself, and the whole story of how we see people are treating Jesus at this time. You know, Jesus has 7 last words from the cross. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. Before, you know, that you will be with me today in paradise. I thirst. He speaks to his, mother and John. Behold your son, behold your mother. Into my hands I commit my spirit. It is finished. And then the only one that Mark lists is in the Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that really sums up the entire crucifixion for Mark. Jesus is the forsaken one. It's all about being forsaken. And so all the interactions we have are about mockery and scoffing. It's that he is an object of ridicule, that he is the forsaken one, which really fulfills a lot of our Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah related to crucifixion, that he is the one who his back has been turned on. Sure, it's painful, and we think of it today as something that's excruciating, a horrible way to die, and it definitely was. But the only painful thing we see in Mark is the crown of thorns. But even that is listed in order to make the costume to mock him. He's mocked by the soldiers, and then the people, the passerbys, the crowd, hurling insults at him, the thieves hurling insults at him, and that he's being forsaken by all those, and the irony and the mocking of it. He can't save himself. He saved others. Can he save himself? And so that's really the whole crucifixion story for Mark, is all about the shame of being forsaken, that he is the forsaken one, that all those have turned against him. The King of the Jews. Again, every detail has to do with mocking and scoffing. We see we might have a little sandwich here. We have all the mocking and scoffing by those who should be following him. We see an absence of the apostles except for John there. John's not in this story, but we know he's at the crucifixion. And we see this, again, someone who we would think would be an outsider, this Simon of Cyrene, who is the father of Alexander and Rufus. It never tells us whose children are, which means they must have known who Alexander and Rufus were. They must have been popular in the early church. But he's the one who carries the cross. He basically fulfills the radical discipleship. He's that picture. He's kind of the walking parable of that. Just like the woman in the temple who gave her 2 last coins, or the woman who anointed him. This guy, who has no real official capacity, he's not famous, we don't really know anything about him, but he kind of comes out of nowhere, and he's the picture in the middle of the crucifixion of the one who takes up his cross. And so it's a beautiful picture there, right in the middle of all the mockery. So that's really what we have, is just Jesus as the one who is shamed and forsaken. That's really what Mark highlights. Other things that you might notice as you go through, where they take him, other details tied to this passage. They take him to Golgotha, which, if you're a King James person, you say, I'm not really familiar with that word. Golgotha is the Aramaic word for place of the skull. And so if you grew up singing the old hymns and reading the King James, you're looking for the word Calvary. Calvary is a Latinized word from the word calvus, meaning skull. So when you see Calvary, that is Golgotha. Golgotha is just a non-translated place there. So taking him outside. And it's also a place of shame, a place partially that could have been shaped like a skull, the top part of a skull, and also a place that would have had skulls and bones, a place of death, a place that is unclean and shameful. Again, adds to the whole idea of the high shame of Calvary. And then, so the one thing that Jesus says, even though we know he says 7 different utterances from the cross, is my God, why have you forsaken me? That's so we see the forsakenness from the Romans, from the crowd, the forsakenness from his apostles by not being there, and the forsakenness of the religious rulers, and then culminating in the forsakenness by the Father, as this, not only just the power of sin, but the shame, all of that, as he is forsaken. And of course, he's quoting the first verse of Psalm 22, and so you can go to Psalm 22 and read that, and you get a whole picture of the rest of the prophecies of what happens during the crucifixion. But of all this that's come, it's just those four little words, and they crucified him. Just that simple, because the crucifixion, if you didn't know what crucifixion was, and we haven't even read about his death yet, you might not even know that this is a torture, that this is a death sentence. It just sounds like somewhere that he is stuck for a while, the kind of things that he's hearing and dealing with. And so it's just one of those things that if you really focus on one gospel at a time, you see kind of the take. And sometimes we forget that the idea of forsakenness by the Father, by his people, by his apostles, by the crowd that he has cared for and taught all this time is, the kind of pain, spiritual anguish that goes with, of course, the obvious physical pain of crucifixion. And that's where Mark leaves us. And next time we'll finish out the crucifixion story, explaining this a little bit more about the last phrase he uses, and they think he's calling Elijah. And we've probably got two more to go before we finish the great Gospel of Mark. So we will stop there and come back next time for another 12 minutes. God bless you.